I forgot my reading glasses and went back home. Walking into the master bedroom, I froze. My husband was kneeling in front of my daughter-in-law, placing a ring on her finger. "My son doesn't deserve you," he murmured. "We were made for each other." I silently recorded a video and sent it to Michael, my son. He didn't reply, but the next morning, the door practically flew off its hinges. What he did to them made even me weep and beg him to stop. Friends, before I begin my story, the story of a betrayal that could have broken me but instead gave me a brand new life, I ask for one small thing. Please subscribe to the channel, give this video a thumbs up, and tell us in the comments what city or country you're listening from. It really helps stories like this get heard. Thank you. Enjoy the listen. That Tuesday morning, the air in Boston, Massachusetts, was especially damp, heavy with the smell of wet granite and falling autumn leaves. It was a typical day, a typical morning, which as I had for the past 40 years, devoted to serving other people's lives. Benedict Sterling, my husband, still demanded starched linen napkins for breakfast, even though he regularly spilled his morning coffee on them. Camille, the wife of our son, Michael Sterling, slept until noon, leaving behind a trail of cheap perfume and glossy celebrity magazines scattered across the living room. I left the house with the goal of picking up fresh collard greens at the Haymarket. Michael, my boy, was due back from his cross-country haul in 2 days, and I wanted to cook his favorite smoky brisket and collard greens. He works as a long-haul trucker, going days without sleep, driving across the country to pay the mortgage on the condo where we all live, and to fund his young wife's every whim. After walking 2 blocks, I paused by a drugstore window. I needed to check my shopping list, but when I reached for my purse, I realized the case for my glasses was still sitting on the dresser in the foyer. Without them, I'm useless as a mole. I had to go back. Our home is an old brick building with high ceilings and crown molding, which Benedict loved to show off to guests, calling it his ancestral home. In truth, it was my parents' legacy, but my husband, a failed architect, always tried to claim the grandeur of those walls for himself. Climbing the 3 flights of stairs, I felt the familiar ache in my knees. The elevator had been out of service for 2 weeks. I opened the door with my key. The lock clicked almost silently, an old German mechanism my father had kept well-oiled. The apartment was quiet. I'd expected no one to be home. Benedict said he had an important meeting at the American Institute of Architects, and Camille was headed out for a manicure. I took off my coat, trying not to make a sound, a habit developed over years of living with a man who was irritated by every noise that wasn't the sound of his own voice. I walked down the hallway past the old Steinway grand piano, the one I'd practiced on years ago for the Eastman School of Music competition, and headed toward my bedroom for my glasses. Then I froze. From behind the slightly ajar door of the bedroom Benedict and I shared, a giggle drifted out. A silly, high-pitched female giggle, the kind I heard every day when Camille watched her endless reality TV shows. Then came the low, velvety voice of my husband, the same voice he once used to read me classic literature, but now only used to demand dinner or complain about his unrecognized genius. "Come on now, stop wiggling, my queen," he purred. My heart skipped a beat, then started hammering in my throat. I took a step forward. The hardwood floor squeaked, but they were too absorbed to hear it. I reached the door and peered through the crack. The sight made the blood drain from my face. Benedict was kneeling. My husband, who complained of arthritis every time I asked him to help move a kitchen chair, was now kneeling before our son's 24-year-old wife. Camille was sitting on the edge of our marriage bed, dressed in an ivory silk robe, extending her hand to him. In his fingers, Benedict held a ring. I recognized it instantly, a large ruby framed in antique gold. It was my mother's ring, the one I was saving for a granddaughter, if we ever had one. It had disappeared from my jewelry box a week earlier, and Benedict had convinced me I was just a forgetful old fool who'd misplaced it. He was slipping it onto Camille's finger. "It was made for you," he breathed, kissing her wrist. "On your skin, it burns like fire. On Matilda, it looked like a boulder on a dried-up twig." Camille laughed, admiring the stone. Oh, Benedict, you're too much. But what about Michael? Won't he notice? My husband's face twisted into a sneer of contempt. Michael? He scoffed. That oaf won't notice anything beyond his hood ornament. He's a simpleton, Camille. A draft mule. He doesn't deserve a diamond like you. We're different. We were made for each other, for beauty, for art. Something inside me snapped. There was no hysteria, no scream, just a glacial emptiness flooding my chest as if I'd been dunked into an icy river. A mule, he'd called our son, who paid for his expensive suits and imported tobacco. Slowly, carefully, holding my breath, I pulled my cell phone from my pocket. The camera turned on without a sound. I aimed the lens through the door crack. The image was slightly shaky, but the focus was sharp. We'll leave as soon as I cash out the account. Paris, Milan. You'll forget that trucker like a bad dream, Benedict continued, rising to his feet and embracing Camille by the waist. I recorded for exactly 30 seconds that wiped out 40 years of my life. Then I hit stop. As silently as I had entered, I backed away. One step, two, past the piano, which was silently witnessing my humiliation. In the foyer, I put on my coat, grabbed the forgotten glasses, a ridiculous automatic reaction, and slipped out of the apartment. Only once I was outside did I realize I was shaking. My feet carried me across the street to the square. I sank onto a cold bench. Mothers were pushing strollers around. People were walking their dogs. The world kept spinning, oblivious to the fact that my universe had just collapsed into a black hole. I opened my messenger app. Contact, son. He'd been online 2 hours ago. I attached the video file. My finger hovered over the send button for just a moment. Pity for him wrestled with the necessity of telling him the truth. The truth won. Send. The loading circle closed. One check mark appeared. A minute or two later, the message was read. I stared at the screen, waiting for a call, a text. Mom? What is this? Is it a joke? But the phone was silent. Michael wasn't typing a reply. He was simply silent. And that silence was more terrifying than any scream. I knew my son. His silence was the calm before a storm that levels cities. I opened the video again just to be sure I hadn't imagined it. I looked at them, their smug faces, the way Benedict possessively stroked the thigh of his son's wife. And then my gaze caught a detail I had missed the first time. Next to the closet in the background stood an open leather suitcase, halfway packed. Over Benedict's silk shirts lay a familiar carved jewelry box, my grandmother's heirloom box. And next to it, carelessly rolled up, a document with an official seal was sticking out. I zoomed in on the screen. Yellowish paper, blue seal. It was the deed of gift for our family cabin in the Poconos. The cold in my chest turned to scorching heat. They weren't just messing around. They weren't just sleeping together behind Michael's and my back. They were planning to run away, and they were going to take everything we had, leaving my son and me penniless amidst the ruins of our lives. I turned off the phone screen. Fear vanished. In its place came clarity, cold and sharp as a surgeon's scalpel. I rose from the bench. I wouldn't be returning home now. I had more important things to do. I marched resolutely toward the main street where our bank's sign glowed. Benedict always considered himself the family's financial genius, but his genius was limited to spending. I had always handled the paperwork, the account openings, and the signatures. In his eyes, it was boring secretarial work beneath a creator. But that very arrogance was now handing me a weapon. The branch smelled of sterilized air conditioning. I sat down opposite a young teller, Marina, whom I had taught piano to 10 years ago. She smiled at me, but I didn't return the gesture. Marina, I need to make an urgent transfer. The entire balance of the joint savings account, all of it. Her eyebrows shot up. But Ms. Sterling, that's years of savings. Does Mr. Sterling know? Mr. Sterling is currently busy with other kinds of investments, I replied dryly. Transfer everything to Michael's trust account without the right of withdrawal by third parties and close access to my credit card for all additional cardholders right now. I watched her fingers fly across the keyboard. Every keystroke resonated with a vengeful satisfaction inside me. This was money saved from my private lessons, from Michael's difficult hauls, from the sale of my parents' lakefront cabin near Maine 5 years ago, so Benedict could open his architectural firm, a firm that never made a dime. Now those figures on the screen melted away, turning into zeros for my husband and his mistress. When I left the bank, my phone vibrated in my pocket. A transaction notification. The deed was done, but it wasn't enough. I dialed a number I kept for special occasions. Elizabeth Dixon, this is Matilda Sterling. The voice on the other end sounded surprised, but warm. Elizabeth Dixon, the district attorney, was a tough woman, but she remembered a kindness. 10 years ago, I had literally pulled her daughter, Olivia, out of a bad crowd, spending hours teaching her music, acting as a counselor and a mother, while Elizabeth built her career. Matilda, what a pleasure. Is everything all right? Not yet, Liz, but it will be tomorrow. I need protection. A legal situation. It's delicate and dirty. My husband and my daughter-in-law. Potential grand larceny and fraud. The pause on the other end lasted a second. I understand. Dictate the details. I'll flag this case personally. No patrol officer will touch you without my clearance. My last stop was a tiny workshop in the basement of the next building. The smell of burnt metal and oil hit my nose. The old locksmith, without asking any questions, made me a new cylinder lock and a set of keys in 10 minutes. The heavy bundle settled into the inside pocket of my coat, chilling my chest through the fabric. It was my guarantee of safety. If necessary, I would barricade myself in my own apartment. I returned home when twilight had already settled over the city. Inserting the old key into the lock, I closed my eyes for a moment, donning the mask of a tired, unsuspecting old woman. "I'm home," I called out, intentionally making my voice sound weak and shaky. Camille floated into the hallway. She was wearing the same ivory dress I'd seen in the video, but now she had a shawl draped over it. Her cheeks were flushed, her eyes glistening with feverish anticipation. "Oh, Matilda, we were so worried about you," she chirped. Benedict was getting antsy. My husband emerged from the living room. He looked smug, like a cat who'd gotten all the cream. "Where have you been, my dear? I called your cell." He walked over and kissed me on the cheek. His lips were clammy and cold. I nearly gagged but forced myself to smile. "Forgot my glasses, then ran into an old friend. My head started throbbing so badly," I mumbled, heading to the kitchen. The evening was a surreal performance. I made dinner, baking a chicken with herbs, mechanically chopping vegetables. The knife hit the wooden board with a dull, rhythmic thump, thump, thump. Benedict and Camille sat at the table, exchanging glances. They thought I didn't see their stares, the light touches of their elbows, the smiles full of secret conspiracy. They were already mentally spending the money I had yanked out from under their noses just an hour before. They were already living in Paris or Milan while, according to their plan, I was supposed to remain here, in an empty condo, with a broken heart and empty accounts. "Camille, darling," I asked, setting a plate in front of her, "has Michael called? I'm a little worried. It's a tough route he's on." Camille didn't even blink. She speared a piece of meat with her fork and put it in her mouth, chewing with a predator's appetite. "Oh, no. He texted this morning that the reception out there is terrible, some middle-of-nowhere back road. He's probably asleep in his cab by now. You know how he is, like a bear. Once he's down, you can't wake him." Benedict smirked, sipping his wine. "Yes, our Michael is not known for his refined sensibilities. All he needs is a steering wheel and a bunk. Don't fret, Matilda, your trucker will show up." I clenched the fork in my hand until my knuckles turned white. My trucker. He spoke of his son as if he were hired help. A wave of hot fury surged up my throat, but I took a gulp of water and swallowed it down. Not now. Not yet. Let them enjoy their final, peaceful meal. I watched them with the detached curiosity of a scientist observing parasites under a microscope. Eat, drink, laugh. After After dinner, I pleaded a migraine and retreated to my room, the small guest room I had moved into 6 months ago, because Benedict complained that my tossing and turning prevented him from thinking in his sleep. Now I understood he just needed to clear the space for his daughter-in-law's nightly visits. I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, where the shadows of passing cars flickered. Silence finally fell over the apartment. Benedict and Camille had retreated to their respective rooms, still maintaining appearances because I was home. The phone, tucked under my pillow, vibrated briefly. Once. I pulled it out, squinting at the bright screen. A message from Michael. My heart stopped. I was afraid to see pain, despair, or questions there. But there was only one line, dry, specific, and terrifying in its simplicity. I turned the rig around, opened the courtyard gate at 5 a.m. I didn't sleep a wink until dawn. I lay motionless, listening to the old house breathe, creak, and cool down in the night. At 5 o'clock on the dot, I slipped silently out of bed, put on my robe, and crept downstairs to the courtyard. The heavy wrought iron gate was difficult to move, the rusty hinges whimpered, but I managed to ease them open without too much noise. The street was empty and gray. No big rig, no roar of an engine, just the silence of a sleeping city. I left the gate ajar, jamming the lock with a small stone, and returned just as quietly to the apartment. Now, all that remained was to wait. At 7 o'clock, Benedict appeared in the kitchen. He was in his usual velvet smoking jacket, with the displeased face of a man who had been awakened earlier than he wished. "Coffee, Matilda," he tossed out, not even looking my way. "And why is it so cold in the house? Are you skimping on the heat again?" "Good morning, Benedict," I replied calmly, putting the coffee pot on the stove. "The heat is on full blast. Maybe your blood is running thin." He grimaced, sitting down at the table and unfolding the newspaper. "Don't talk nonsense. And this coffee." He took a sip and made a face as if he'd swallowed vinegar. "It's sour. Did you buy that cheap discount junk? I asked for Arabica only, from that little coffee shop by Copley Square." I bought what the money allowed for. I turned to him, leaning my back against the countertop. "Speaking of money, I logged into the online bank yesterday to pay the electricity bill, and the savings account was completely empty." Benedict froze. The newspaper in his hand stopped rustling. He slowly lowered it and looked at me over his glasses. A flicker of irritation, mixed with arrogance, crossed his eyes, not fear. "Oh, Matilda." He sighed as if explaining a theorem to a first grader. "Don't trouble your little head with numbers. I made an investment, a large, very promising one. We'll be rich soon. Trust me." "An investment?" I repeated, feeling the cold rage boil up inside me. "In an architectural project, in the future," he exclaimed dramatically. "In our future." At that moment, Camille walked into the kitchen. She hadn't even bothered to dress properly. She was wearing a translucent negligee that barely covered her, and on her finger, the ruby of my mother sparkled on her right ring finger. She saw me looking at her hand and didn't hide it. Instead, she demonstratively adjusted her hair, allowing the stone to catch a ray of the morning sun. "Morning, family," she sang, pouring herself a glass of juice. "What's the fight about?" "Matilda's worried about finances," Benedict chuckled. "She doesn't understand that money should work, not lie around like dead weight." Camille exchanged a look with him and snickered into her hand. "Oh, well, of course, investments are so important. Right, Daddy?" She called him Daddy with an intonation that was filthier than any curse word. They were certain the investment was the money they planned to steal. They thought I was just an old fool who'd noticed a few $1,000s missing, not the complete account depletion that I myself had orchestrated yesterday. Their smugness was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Benedict stood up, walked over to me, and placed his hand on my shoulder, a heavy, possessive hand. "You look tired, darling. All this commotion, the nerves. You know what I think? You need a break. Why don't you drive up to the Poconos cabin today? Air, pine trees, silence. Stay there for a week. Clear your head." "Yes, Matilda," Camille chimed in, her eyes sparkling. "We can manage here. It would be good for you. You can take walks and unwind." They were kicking me out. They needed the apartment empty by evening so they could quietly pack their things, take the money, which was already gone, and disappear before Michael arrived. To the cabin, the very cabin whose deed I had seen in their suitcase. The cynicism was off the charts. I gently removed my husband's hand from my shoulder with 2 fingers, as if it were a dirty rag. "Thank you for your concern, Benedict, but I think I'll stay." I looked him straight in the eye and smiled a thin, vicious smile he had never seen before. "We're expecting company." Benedict frowned. "Company? What company? I didn't invite anyone." "I did," I replied, picking up my cup of tea and taking a small sip. He was about to object, to open his mouth to put me in my place, but then came a sound. It wasn't the doorbell. The intercom was silent. It was a rumbling, a dull, growing hum coming from somewhere below, deep in the stairwell. Like a giant animal climbing the stairs, heavy, rhythmic thuds. Bam! 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 With every thud, the china in the hutch rattled. Camille froze with the juice glass at her mouth. Benedict turned his head toward the door. "What the hell is that?" he muttered. "Movers again? I'm going to complain to the building manager." Bam! 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 The sound was getting closer. They were footsteps, heavy, work boots stomping on the stone steps. The 3rd floor. The sound stopped right outside our door. Silence fell. An absolute ringing silence in which you could hear the wall clock ticking. Benedict took a step toward the foyer. "Who's there?" he barked in his commanding voice. "I'm calling the police right now." Instead of an answer, the lock clicked, but not the usual way. A key turned with furious force, and then the doorknob was violently yanked down. They had forgotten. In their arrogance, they had forgotten that Michael had keys too, that he wasn't a guest in this house, but the owner who paid for these walls. The door began to open slowly, but it didn't get all the way. The moment Camille shrieked and sprinted from the kitchen toward the bedroom, hoping to lock herself in, a deafening crack tore through the air. The saving bedroom door, which she had barely managed to slam shut, shuddered from a monstrous blow from outside. The wood splintered, the hinges ripped away, and the heavy slab of the door crashed into the room, kicking up a cloud of dust. Michael stood in the doorway. He was terrifying. I had seen my son in various states, tired, happy, focused, but never like this. He seemed enormous, filling the entire hallway. His road jacket was unzipped. Beneath it, his chest rose and fell like a bellows. His eyes, usually kind and calm, were bloodshot from sleeplessness and fury. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking only ahead. Benedict, who was being brave a second ago, backed away until his back hit the china cabinet. "You!" he wheezed, trying to regain his composure. "How dare you break into my home like a barbarian? You broke the door! You—" Michael didn't answer. He didn't even slow his stride. He walked past me like an icebreaker through thin ice, heading straight for his father. Benedict threw out a hand in a ridiculous defensive gesture. "Don't you touch me! I'm your father! I'm—" Michael simply swatted him away. With one short, sharp motion, he shoved Benedict in the chest. My husband, my great architect, flew backward like a rag doll and collapsed onto the sofa, gasping for air. His glasses were crooked, making him look comical and pathetic. "Sit!" Michael roared. It was not a word, but a command forged in iron. Then he turned toward the bedroom, where Camille was huddled in the corner behind the door wreckage. She was shaking, clutching her hands to her chest, trying to become invisible. "Michael!" she whimpered as he stepped into the room, stepping over the broken door. "Michael, it's not what you think. We need to talk. Let's discuss this." Michael walked right up to her. He didn't swing, he didn't strike. He just reached out and firmly, without a shred of tenderness, grabbed her left wrist. "Ow! You're hurting me!" she squealed, trying to pull away. He yanked her hand toward him and forcibly ripped the ring off her finger. "My ruby!" Camille screamed, more from fear than pain. Michael tossed her hand aside as if he'd touched something sticky and filthy. The ring fell with a clink onto the polished end table next to a vase. The sound was clean and sharp. You thought I was blind? His voice was quiet, vibrating with restrained power. You thought I was just the mule who drives the freight while you play queen? He plunged his hand into the inner pocket of his jacket and pulled out a folded packet of papers, printouts. He threw them in Camille's face. The sheets fluttered around the room like white snowflakes. "Read!" he snarled. Camille pressed herself against the wall, staring at the papers on the floor. They were bank statements. "You didn't just sleep with him." Michael jabbed a finger toward the living room, where Benedict was recovering on the sofa. "You've been stealing for 2 years. Every haul, every dime I saved for the down payment on our place, on our home, you transferred it all to a dummy account, an account he had access to." Benedict in the living room tried to stand up. "That's a lie! It's slander! We were saving for a family business." Michael spun around to him. "Business?" He laughed, and that laughter was more frightening than his silence. "A business to buy one-way tickets." He went to the TV standing in the living room and ripped out the HDMI cable for the gaming console, replacing it with a small thumb drive. The screen flickered and lit up. "You thought I was an idiot?" Michael said, looking at his father. "Remember 6 months ago when the neighbors were robbed? I told you I was installing an alarm system. I put in more than just that." The screen showed an image. Living room. A view from above. From a bookshelf. The date in the corner. 1 month ago. On the video, Benedict and Camille were sitting on the same sofa. They were drinking wine. "That idiot is gone for another week," Benedict was saying on the screen. "It's so good without his sour face." "Tell me about it," Camille replied, resting her head on his shoulder. "Listen, when can we cash out? I saw the most gorgeous coat." "Soon, my darling, as soon as the amount is enough to buy a nice little villa. Let them rot here in this dampness." A dead silence hung in the room. Only the voices from the screen continued to pour out filth. They discussed what a terrible cook I was, what a failure Michael was, and how much they hated this city and this condo. They laughed about how cleverly they were deceiving us, every day, month after month. Benedict turned pale, looking like a ghost. Camille slid down the wall to the floor, covering her face with her hands. "I watched this last night," Michael said. His voice cracked, but only for a second. "While I drove back, 400 miles, I listened to you laugh at me, at my mother." He walked to the end table, where Benedict's laptop sat, his holy of holies, his work tool. "You said I was worthless, that I was just a driver." Michael lifted the laptop with one hand. "And what are you?" "A parasite." He slammed the laptop down across his knee. The crunch of plastic and glass was sickening. He broke it in half like a dry twig and threw the fragments at his father's feet. "That's just the start," Michael whispered. His gaze darted around the room, searching for the next target, and he found it. Benedict twitched, trying to cover the laptop's remains, but Michael had already stepped over him. His target was the long shelf along the wall, my husband's pride, his altar. There, under glass domes, stood architectural models, delicate, painstakingly glued copies of cathedrals and palaces he supposedly designed in his youth, but which remained only the fantasies of an unrecognized genius. "Don't you dare!" Benedict shrieked. His voice broke into a falsetto. "That's art! That's my soul!" Michael didn't even turn around. He grabbed the first model, a copy of some Gothic spire, and violently hurled it at the opposite wall. The sound was horrifying. The fragile balsa wood exploded into splinters. The glass dome shattered everywhere, showering the parquet floor in sparkling rain. "Your soul!" Michael roared, grabbing the next model. "Your soul is rotten, Pop, just like these cardboard cutouts." The second model, a modernist library design, flew to the floor. Crunch! The balsa snapped with a dry, dead sound. Benedict wailed. He truly howled like a wounded animal, crawling on his knees amidst the debris of his career. "You're destroying history! You barbarian! Matilda, do something! He's insane!" I stood in the kitchen doorway, clutching my cold cup of tea. I didn't move. I watched the world Benedict had built around himself for decades collapse, a world of lies and self-admiration, and I didn't feel pity, only a strange, frightening sense of relief. Michael methodically, one by one, destroyed the collection. He wasn't just breaking objects, he was obliterating the symbols of his father's power over us. Every impact was an answer for years of humiliation. For every, "You're not good enough." For every condescending look. Camille, seeing Michael distracted by the shelf, tried to slip out. She clutched a purse that I knew held her documents and perhaps her remaining cash. "I'm leaving. I'm calling the cops. You're all psychos," she screamed, yanking the front door handle. But Michael was faster. He didn't run. He took 2 gigantic strides and slammed the door shut right in front of her face, hitting the panel with his palms so hard that plaster fell from the frame. "Nobody is leaving," he said quietly, towering over her. "We're not done yet." He snatched the purse from her hands and emptied the contents onto the floor. Lipstick, keys, her passport, and a stack of bills secured with a rubber band. The money they must have withdrawn secretly before I blocked the accounts. "My money," he stated, planting his heavy boot on the bills. Then he turned and walked into the bedroom where that suitcase stood, the suitcase for their new life. "You wanted to leave?" he yelled from the room. "You wanted Paris, Milan? Here you go." He returned to the living room, dragging the open suitcase behind him. Clothes spilled out onto the floor. Benedict's silk shirts, Camille's lace lingerie, expensive ties. Michael went to the window. "We live on the 4th floor." The window overlooked the courtyard well, where the acoustics magnified every sound 100 times. He yanked the sashes open. The cold morning air rushed into the stuffy, fear-soaked room. "Fly!" he screamed, and began throwing their belongings out the window. First to fly was Benedict's Armani jacket. Following it, Camille's evening dress. Stiletto heels clattered against the sill and vanished into the abyss. Perfume bottles shattered on the asphalt below with characteristic pops. "No, my dresses!" Camille sobbed, rushing to the window, but Michael shoved her back with his elbow without looking. "Your dresses were bought with my money, so I decide where they go." Benedict, forgetting his models, ran to the window, clutching his heart. "What are you doing? There are people down there. There are neighbors. You're humiliating us in front of the whole city." "Humiliating?" Michael grabbed a handful of shirts and flung them down. They fluttered, spinning like wounded birds. "Humiliation is what you were doing in my bed. Humiliation is stealing from your son. This is just trash." Voices began to rise from the courtyard below. "Hey, what's going on up there? Are you crazy? It almost hit me. Call the police! Call the police!" People came out onto their balconies, gathering below, watching the rain of expensive clothes. Our respectable building, our facade of well-being, was crumbling before everyone's eyes. Michael didn't stop. He tore down the heavy velvet curtains, the ones Benedict had spent 6 months choosing, claiming they created an atmosphere of aristocracy. The rod ripped out of the wall with a screech, leaving holes. Michael crumpled the dusty fabric and threw it out after the clothes. The room instantly filled with gray morning light, mercilessly illuminating the destruction, shattered glass, splinters, overturned furniture. The nest was ravaged. Benedict, realizing that saving the objects was futile, suddenly changed expression. Fear was replaced by malicious determination. He saw the crowd gathering below. He ran to the window, pushing Michael aside, and leaned out halfway. "Help!" he shrieked hysterically, waving his arms. "They're killing me! There's a crazy man up here! Call the police! He's going to kill us!" Michael stepped back, breathing heavily. The adrenaline that had driven him forward was beginning to give way to realization. He looked at his hands, then at his father screaming out the window. In that moment, I knew everything was about to be decided. If the police arrived now, they would see a wrecked apartment, a seemingly beaten old man. Benedict was a virtuoso at playing the victim, and an enraged, hulking son. Michael would be taken away. He would go to prison. And these two would remain here, in my condo, celebrating their victory by posing as martyrs. I placed my cup on the table, calmly, neatly, and walked to the front door. I clicked the deadbolts shut, locking it all the way. Then I took out my bundle of new keys, the ones from the locksmith, and slipped them into my deep pocket. "No one is calling anyone," I said loudly and clearly, cutting through Benedict's shrieks. My husband froze, turning to me. His face was red with effort. "You! What are you doing? He's a psycho! He's going to kill us! Open the door, you idiot!" I walked up to Michael and stood next to him. I was a small, gray-haired woman next to a furious giant, but at that moment I felt like a rock. "No, Benedict," I said, looking my husband in the eyes. "The police will arrive only when I want them to, and until then, we are going to talk about the real crimes." Michael didn't hear me. His eyes were glued to his father, who continued to whine about his rights and the police. My son was breathing heavily, his fists clenching and unclenching. Suddenly, he moved sharply toward the massive oak chair by the dining table, the chair with the high carved back where Benedict liked to preside as the patriarch. Michael grabbed it with one hand, lifted it above his head as if it weighed nothing, and stepped toward his father. "You want the police?" he choked out. "I'll give you a reason to call them, a real reason." Benedict, seeing the shadow looming over him, collapsed to his knees. His bravado instantly vanished, leaving only animal terror. He covered his head with his hands, curling into a ball. "No, Michael! Son, don't hit me! I'm your father!" he sobbed, snot and drool running down his chin. "It wasn't me, it was her! She seduced me! I'm an old man, I couldn't resist. She's a witch!" Camille, hearing this, shrieked from her corner. "What, you old goat? You were climbing all over me. You promised me money. You said he was impotent and a failure. You made me do it." "Liar!" Benedict screamed, still without lifting his head. "You jumped into my bed. You wanted the money and the lifestyle." They were biting each other like rats in a barrel, shifting the blame, dousing each other in the filth they had wallowed in. It was disgusting, and it was dangerous. I saw Michael's eyes. They were dark, his pupils dilated. He no longer saw his father or the woman he once loved. He saw enemies. He was ready to bring that chair down. If he did, a blow of that force would crush Benedict's skull. It would be the end. Prison. A shattered life. A victory for these lowlifes, even at the cost of their health. I couldn't allow it. I rushed to my son, standing between him and the whimpering Benedict on the floor, raising my hands, trying to reach his face. "Michael, stop!" He didn't react. The muscles in his arms were stone. He was ready to strike. "Michael!" I screamed with all my might, and then I did something I had never done in my life. I drew back my arm and slapped his cheek. The loud slap echoed through the room. My son's head snapped back. He blinked, as if coming out of a trance. His gaze focused on me. The chair in his hands trembled but did not drop. "Mom!" he exhaled, and the confusion of a child was in his voice. "Put the chair down," I said quietly but firmly, looking him straight in the eyes. "Immediately. They are not worth it, son. Not worth your freedom. Look at them." I pointed to the floor. Benedict, wiping tears from his face, was trying to crawl under the table. Camille, with messy hair and smudged mascara, looked like a cheap doll thrown into the garbage. "This is filth, Michael. If you strike them, you'll be stained forever. You'll go to prison. And they will live on, play the victims. Do you want to give them that victory?" Michael breathed heavily, staring at his father. Slowly, very slowly, he lowered the chair to the floor. The legs hit the parquet with a dull thud. "So what do I do?" he asked, and there was so much pain in his voice that my heart ached. Just let them go after all this? "No." I shook my head, feeling the steel spring inside me unwind. "We won't let them go. We'll destroy them. But we'll do it our way. By the book." I turned to Benedict. He had stopped whimpering and was now looking at me with hope, thinking I had saved him. Fool. "Stand up," I ordered. He managed to get to his feet, holding the edge of the table, trying to regain a shred of dignity, smoothing his torn smoking jacket. "Matilda, thank God you've come to your senses. That psychopath—" "Shut up," I cut him off. You will now gather your things, what's left of them, and you will leave this house forever." Benedict straightened up, and that same arrogant expression I had tolerated for 40 years returned to his face. "I'll leave? Why would I? This is my condo, Matilda. We've been married for 40 years. Half of everything here is mine. The cabin, the accounts. You can't kick me out. I'll call the police, document the assault, and your son will go to jail while you pay me alimony for the rest of your life." Camille, sensing the change in the wind, immediately backed him up. "Yes, and me too, for emotional distress." I smiled. It was the same smile I used to give my students before handing them a failing grade for an unprepared lesson. "Benedict, you were always a bad architect. You never read the blueprints carefully. You missed one detail." I walked to the secretary, opened the bottom drawer, the only one Michael hadn't destroyed because he knew it was my space, and pulled out a file. "This condo," I began, flipping through the papers, "belonged to my parents, my father, a professor at Juilliard, and my mother. They bought it in 1965. "So what?" Benedict scoffed. "We're married, jointly acquired." "No," I interrupted. "When we got married, my father insisted on a prenuptial agreement. You were so in love with yourself and your prospects back then that you signed it without reading. You thought you'd make millions yourself, remember?" Benedict's face turned gray. "And after my parents passed," I continued, savoring every word, "the condo transferred to me by will, not as joint property, only to me. You are listed here as a resident? Yes, but as a family member of the owner. And what if you stop being a family member, or if you commit a felony against the owner?" I took out my phone. "I called District Attorney Elizabeth Dixon yesterday. Remember Liz? The mother of that girl, Olivia, whom I taught. She's waiting for my call. I have a video, Benedict. A video where you discuss stealing money. Michael has bank statements confirming transfers to shell companies you opened in my name without my knowledge. That's felony grand larceny and conspiracy, punishable by up to 10 years in federal prison." I saw his knees buckle again. You wouldn't do that. I'm your husband." "You stopped being my husband the second you put my mother's ring on that girl's finger," I cut him off. "You have a choice. Either you take your trash bag and walk out right now, signing a waiver of all claims, or in 10 minutes, there will be a squad car here sent by the DA herself, and then you won't be going to the Poconos. You'll be going to state prison." Benedict was silent. He shifted his gaze from me to Michael, then to the door. He was calculating his options and knew he had lost. But then he suddenly straightened. A final, desperate flicker of cunning gleamed in his eyes. He stepped toward Camille, grabbed her arm, and pulled her close. "Fine. The condo is yours. But you forgot about something else, Matilda. Something that binds us stronger than any walls." He placed his hand on her abdomen. "She's pregnant," he announced triumphantly. "Camille is carrying my child, your grandson, or your son's half-sibling. You won't kick a pregnant woman and the father of your grandson onto the street. The court won't allow it." Camille nodded, seizing onto the lie like a life raft. Yes, I'm pregnant. 2 months already. I have a doctor's note somewhere. You can't do this." I looked at them, at this pathetic farce, and felt not anger, but boundless revulsion. I turned my gaze to Michael. He stood quietly, his arms at his sides. A strange, bitter half-smile appeared on his face. "Pregnant?" he repeated softly. "Yes!" Benedict shouted, "and that changes everything!" Michael reached into the back pocket of his jeans and pulled out a piece of paper folded into quarters, already worn and creased. "Show them, son," I said. Michael unfolded the paper and, without saying a word, tossed it onto the table in front of Benedict. The sheet floated down, gently landing on top of the vase shards. "Read it, Pop," he said with icy calm. "Read it out loud." Benedict, squinting without his shattered glasses, leaned over the table. His lips moved, trying to decipher the medical terms. Conclusion. Spermia. Irreversible changes, he mumbled, and with every word his face lengthened. "What is this? What nonsense is this?" "Those are the results of my medical examination," Michael said harshly. "A year ago, Camille and I were trying to conceive. Nothing was working. I went to the doctor. Complications after the mumps I had as a kid. I am sterile, Father. I can never have children." The silence in the room was heavy, like a tombstone. Camille paled until she looked like a ghost. She backed away from Benedict, covering her mouth with her hand. Benedict looked up at his son, then at me. Triumph flashed in his gaze. "Aha!" he exclaimed, pointing a finger at Michael. "So you're empty, incomplete, but I'm a man? Camille is pregnant with my child. That proves my strength. My bloodline continues, and yours won't. This is my baby." He grabbed Camille by the shoulder, pulling her to him like a trophy. "Did you hear that, Matilda? This is my seed. You wouldn't dare throw out the mother of my heir?" I looked at him and felt the last drop of pity for this man evaporate, leaving only the dry desert of contempt. I sighed, adjusted my cuff, and took a step forward. "Benedict, you are an idiot," I said calmly. "You have always been an idiot, but now you have surpassed yourself." He froze, his mouth open. "What? How dare you?" "Do you remember 1993? I asked. "Your surgery to remove the inguinal hernia? You were so afraid of the anesthesia, so shaky." "What does that have to do with anything?" he snarled. "It has to do with the fact that the hernia was complicated. And the doctor, our old friend Dr. Levy, warned me there were risks. During the operation, it became necessary, let's just say, to take extra precautions to prevent recurrences and inflammation." I paused, letting the words sink in. "You had a vasectomy, Benedict, for medical reasons, of course, but I signed the consent form because you were under anesthesia and the risks were high. Dr. Levy told you that your function was preserved, meaning your potency, but you have not been able to have children for 30 years. I just didn't have the heart to tell you. You were so proud of your manhood." Benedict released Camille's shoulder as if it had become red hot. He staggered, grasping the edge of the table. That's a lie. You're lying." "Call the clinic," I shrugged. "They keep the archives, but you already know I'm not lying. Think about how many affairs you've had over the years, how many secretaries, and not one came back with a baby bump. You thought you were lucky? No, darling, that was biology." Benedict slowly turned his head to Camille. His face was contorted in a grimace that is difficult to describe, a mix of horror, fury, and the realization of his own worthlessness. "So whose baby is it?" he whispered. "If Michael is empty, and I'm empty, whose?" Camille flattened herself against the wall. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for an escape. Her lie, her insurance, her ticket to a comfortable life had crumbled into dust. I, she stammered. "It's a mistake. The test could be wrong." Michael stepped toward her. "Is there no baby?" he asked hoarsely. Camille began to weep, sliding down the wallpaper. "No, there's not. I lied so you would get married faster, so the money would be transferred. I thought we'd leave, and then I'd say I had a miscarriage. Benedict promised me a villa. He said he had millions in the bank." "I had millions," Benedict roared, lunging at her. "Did you spend it? You leech! You sucked everything out of me." He swung his fist, but Michael intercepted his arm, easily, effortlessly, and pushed his father away. "Enough," he said. "The show is over." At that moment, the doorbell rang, loudly, insistently. I checked my watch. Elizabeth Dixon was punctual. I walked to the door and unlocked the deadbolts. 2 uniformed police officers stood on the threshold, young, sturdy men with serious faces. "Matilda Sterling?" the senior officer asked. "Yes, that's me," I nodded. "Please come in. We have trespassers here. They refuse to leave the premises and are making threats." The officers entered the condo, surveying the wreckage. Benedict, seeing the uniform, tried to adopt a dignified air, but in his torn robe and without his glasses, he looked pitiful. "Officers!" he exclaimed. "Thank God! This man, He pointed at Michael. "Attacked us. He smashed furniture. He threatened murder. Arrest him." The senior officer looked at Benedict, then at me. "Ms. Sterling, this gentleman claims there was an assault." "This gentleman," I replied calmly, "is my ex-husband, who illegally entered my condo with his accomplice. The furniture?" I gestured around the room. "It's old. We started a renovation, debris removal. They broke in and tried to interfere, demanding money. Here are their belongings, by the way." I pointed to the black trash bag I had managed to prepare while they were arguing. "I'm asking you to remove them. If they refuse, I will be forced to file a report for fraud and extortion. Prosecutor Dixon is aware of the situation." At the mention of the DA's name, the officers snapped to attention. "Understood." The senior officer nodded. He turned to Benedict. "Sir, you need to leave. Gather your things and exit the premises." But I live here," Benedict stammered. "Do you have title?" the officer asked dryly. "No. The owner is demanding you vacate the residence. Resolve civil disputes in court. For now you need to leave, or we will charge you with disturbing the peace. You've caused a scandal here. Neighbors are complaining." Benedict knew it was the end. He looked at me. There was no remorse in his gaze, only hatred and fear of a future where he had neither me, nor money, nor a home. He silently grabbed the bag. He didn't even look at Camille. He just walked toward the door, stooped, old, a pathetic man who had lost everything because of his own stupidity. Camille didn't wait for an invitation. As soon as the officers were distracted by Benedict, she darted into the hallway, clutching her purse, and dashed out onto the stairs, her broken heel clicking. She was running into nowhere, without a husband, without a lover, without money. The door slammed shut. The condo was silent. Only the wind from the broken window rustled the remnants of the curtains on the floor. We were alone, my son and I. Michael stood in the middle of the wrecked living room, his head bowed. His shoulders were trembling. I walked up to him and hugged him. He was so big, so strong, but now he was weeping, silently, terrifyingly. I felt his tears fall onto the top of my head. "It's over, son," I whispered, stroking his broad back. "It's all over. We cleaned out the rot. Now we're going to live." He sank to his knees in front of me, burying his face in my shoulder, just like when he was a little boy. "Forgive me, Mom. I was blind. I brought her into our home." "You loved Michael. That's not a sin. The sin is betraying those who love you. And you protected us. You took out the trash. Now we just need to clean up." I looked over his head at the broken window, beyond which a new day was beginning. The sun was already pouring onto the roofs of Boston. The air was fresh and clean. For the first time in years, I could breathe easily. We started not with cleaning, but with music. I walked to the old Steinway, opened the lid that I hadn't lifted in years for fear of disturbing my husband's creative peace, and pressed the keys. The chords sounded a little out of tune, but powerful, drowning out the whistle of the wind in the broken window. Michael lifted his head. Tears were still in his eyes, but the madness was gone. He smiled faintly, hesitantly, but genuinely. "Chopin?" he asked hoarsely. "The Nocturne in D-flat major." I nodded. "It's about time for it." The next 6 months flew by like one long, difficult, but happy day. We scrubbed the apartment as if we were exorcising evil spirits. Michael tore down the wallpaper in the bedroom with his own hands, the same monogrammed paper Camille had chosen. We threw out more than just the broken models and smashed furniture. We tossed everything that reminded us of Benedict, his collection of pipes, his dusty books on the theory of genius, even the rugs soaked with the smell of his tobacco. The condo was transformed. We removed heavy partitions, letting light into the living room. The walls were painted a warm cream color. The windows, which Michael replaced himself, now shone brightly, and the sun streamed into the house, unobstructed by velvet curtains. Michael changed no less than our home. He sold the big rig. "No more cross-country hauls, Mom. he told me then. "I want to sleep in my own bed and eat dinner with you." With the money from the sale and the remnants of the savings I had rescued, he started a small local logistics company. Now he wore neat shirts instead of greasy overalls, had lost weight, and shaved off the beard he used to hide behind. He was once again the handsome, intelligent man I knew before his father's reproaches and his wife's betrayal broke him. And I finally opened my own music school right there in the living room. Now, in the evenings, our home was filled not with Benedict's grumbling, but with the clear voices of children and the sound of scales. My students, the children of those same prosecutors and doctors, loved coming to our home. They loved the atmosphere of freedom and dignity that now reigned within those walls. One evening, as the Boston rain was falling outside, we were sitting in the living room. I was playing that very nocturne on the now perfectly tuned piano. Michael sat in a new armchair reading a book, and steaming mint tea was on the table. The doorbell rang, not the intercom, but the actual door. "A postal carrier," Michael said. He stood up and brought back an envelope. A plain, cheap, gray envelope with no return address. But I recognized the handwriting instantly. Shaky, with elaborate curls. Benedict. My son looked at me questioningly, holding out the letter. "From him?" "Yes," I replied calmly, not stopping the music with my left hand. Michael frowned. "Should I throw it away? Or read it? What if there are threats?" "No, Michael, they aren't threats. They are requests." I knew what it said without even opening it. I knew Benedict. He was likely writing about how difficult his life was, how sick he was, how cruel the world was to geniuses. He was begging for money, a small loan until his next big project. He was probably living in some cheap motel room on the outskirts, drinking away the remnants of his former shine, and blaming us for everything. I stopped playing. I took the envelope from my son's hand. The paper was rough and unpleasant to the touch. "What are you going to do?" Michael asked. I looked at the envelope, then at my cup of hot tea. If I didn't use a coaster, the hot ceramic would leave marks on the polished wood of the piano. "Do me a favor, son," I said. "Put the kettle on." And then I placed the unopened letter on the edge of the piano and carefully, with a light thud, set my hot cup right on top of it. "An excellent coaster," I smiled. "Just the right size." Michael laughed, a loud, booming, free laugh. He put his arms around my shoulders and kissed the top of my head. "You're the best, Mom." "I know," I replied, and touched the keys again. The music flowed onward, clean and bright, washing away the last shadows of the past. We won not with force, not with malice, but by staying true to ourselves. We endured, and now we had a whole life ahead of us. Friends, that concludes the story of Matilda Sterling, the story of how a quiet, refined woman who was considered weak and submissive her whole life proved stronger than the two predators who tried to destroy her family. Do you think Matilda did the right thing? Many might say that throwing a husband out on the street, even one so treacherous, is cruel, that she should have shown mercy, given him a second chance. But would Benedict and Camille have given her a chance? Weren't they planning to leave her penniless, sick, and alone in an empty condo? Matilda wasn't just defending property. She was defending her dignity, her son's future, and the memory of her parents. Sometimes, mercy to the wolf is cruelty to the lamb. And what about Michael's actions? His rage was terrifying, but it was the catalyst that burst the abscess. Without his intervention, this lie could have lasted for years. Write in the comments what you think. Should he have held back, or did they deserve the destruction? And what would you have done in Matilda's place upon discovering such a betrayal? If you have any questions about the plot, or want to know what happened to the characters next, please write, and I will gladly answer in the comments. Perhaps Benedict will try to return, or Camille will hatch a new scheme. Who knows? If you want, we can glimpse their future in new stories. Please don't forget to like this video. It is the best thanks for our work. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the new audiobooks already in production. Your support inspires us to find and tell the most poignant life stories. We wish you all the best. A box will appear in the center of the screen at the end of this video. Click on it to watch our other most thrilling stories.